Very good, thank you. My name's Tim. I'm an addict, uh, and I also happen to be an alcoholic. I'm also a member of Al-Anon, and I've done many other things which I no longer do. I'm not going to give you their list. Uh, the reason I mention that at all is because whatever one is doing that is against God's will, God is powerful enough to solve, apparently, with enough willingness and sometimes with enough time. I didn't stop all of my behaviours all at once. Anyway, let's start at the very beginning. Um, Maria von Trapp would have said, start at the very beginning. Uh, I'm an addict. My date of sobriety is the 24th of July 1993, which makes me 31 years and some change, sober and clear of nasty little substances. And my main fellowship is AA, but I dipped into and visited and spoken in lots of different places, and I got friends all over the place. And my I have to say, my program is a horrible mashup of everything I've heard in AA and in other fellowships, and all sorts of things I've heard outside as well, which have made their way in. I mean, the thing is that the program came from. We didn't make it up ourselves. You think we could have made this up ourselves? We got it from somewhere else. We got it from the Oxford groups, and we got some medical knowledge from Silkworth, and we got some knowledge about psychology, in fact, from Harry Tebow. Now, I agreed to do this a while ago, and it was asked, well, what topic? And I thought to myself, I don't know. And I said to God, well, what shall I talk about? And the phrase came to mind, waking up. I must have been thinking about waking up or being asleep that day. So that's what I'm going to talk about. I haven't prepared anything uh, on the basis that if I need to prepare something for something like this, if I'm going to talk about, someone says, come and talk about concept 7 and how it relates to this aspect of the service structure, I might want to do a bit of homework. But the point of this kind of deal is that I'm really telling my story. What was the asleepness? To wake up implies I've been asleep. Um, the asleepness when I was using, I didn't look asleep. I looked pretty busy. My days were filled with waiting until I could drink and do some other things, and then doing the things, and then doing the things way beyond the point at which I was enjoying myself, and then recovering from doing the things. I remember someone at a meeting a few weeks ago said when he was drinking, he would lie on his bed at 2 o'clock in the morning with his foot on the floor and one eye open to stop the room spinning. And I thought, I remember that. I haven't heard anyone talk about that for a long time. I remember that exact feeling, thinking, I wish my head would stop spinning because I need to get up tomorrow and I've drunk so much and it's late and it's all a catastrophe anyway because I didn't do anything I should have done today and I really need to go to sleep, but I can't because my head is spinning. And I'd wake up, I'd open my eyes and then the room would stop spinning. Then I'd close my eyes and then the room would start spinning again, and that would go on for a long time. But the foot on the floor helped. I don't know why. I looked pretty busy, and you wouldn't have thought that I was awake. Um, God is very patient in some ways, so I was allowed a lot of rope by my higher power. The higher power, my higher power. As if it's in my pocket, it belongs to me, or as if I can operate the levers. The higher power. The higher power gave me a lot of rope. In that, I very nearly destroyed myself completely in 4 years. It was 4 years between really going on the lash properly on a daily basis and coming into recovery. But even through those 4 years, uh, I think God was occupying himself with me. And I don't think because I'm special. I think he probably occupies himself with a lot of people. Apparently, he's terribly good at multitasking. People aren't. They say that multitasking makes you as stupid as dope. Um, but God apparently is very good at this, so he can interfere in people's lives left, right, and centre. Do one thing with one hand, another thing with another hand. And I think the phrase they use is wake up call. I had so many wake up calls. In other words, I had so many situations that got my attention. But I battled on bravely with the drink and the other things, blithely ignoring these. Um, but also, to get help, one's got to know there is help. And one's got to know where to find it. I think, frankly, it's terribly easy today. People are connected with each other in a way that they weren't 30 years ago. If you were stuck in a village in Dorset and say, well, I want to give up drinking, what do you do? I don't go to the library? I mean, I can't imagine. Um, Now it's much easier. There's Google and people are just aware of things about addiction recovery. And there were some times when I woke up for a little while. I woke up in 1990 in the summer and thought this, and I gestured in the general direction of pretty much everything I was doing in my life. This has to stop. And sometimes people say that alcoholism means you can't stop drinking. And in a sense, there's some truth to that. Top of page 44 of the big book, it's dual test for alcoholism. I'm going to paraphrase it as effectively if you try to stop and you can't, and if when you drink way too much or alcohol, essentially is what it says. But I've got to be careful about language. AA, Al-Anon, these fellowships have taught me to be very careful about the words that I use and how I use them, and to make sure I'm using the word that I mean. For years, I could stop drinking in that I could uh, drink all evening, drink into the night, drink until 2 o'clock in the morning, get up the next morning and not reach for a drink, and somehow battle through the day feeling like death warmed up, and go for the rest of that day without a drink, maybe until 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock. I could put those days together. In the summer of 1990, I was in Finland, don't ask. Um, and I put together several weeks of sobriety, and then I got drunk on one particular occasion, put together a few more weeks, got drunk on one occasion, put together a few more weeks. So I could stop, and even right at the end, uh, when I joined recovery at the beginning of 1993, I would get a few months or a few weeks or a few days, and I could stop. I wasn't physically addicted in the sense of going into seizures if I stopped abruptly. And that's a different question. The physical addiction to a substance which requires a detox to stop the person having a grand mal seizure is very different than the not being able to stop. What it is really meant by that phrase, very often not being able to stop, is stopping but being unable to stay stopped, being forced by some internal compulsion to go back and try, as it refers to it, the desperate experiment of the first drink, thinking this time it'll be different, or this time I mean, I never thought I'm going to drink moderately, but I thought I could have basically a skinful, but maybe slightly less of a skinful than I normally would. I could just shave off the top sort of 20% of it. So I wouldn't go into blackout. I wouldn't get into trouble. I wouldn't spend extra money. I wouldn't get leery. I wouldn't get into fights. That was the experiment. Let's see if I can pull it off. So God tried to wake me up and I woke up, but I fell asleep again. And part of that is there is a Star Trek episode. I'm not particularly a Star Trek person. I've seen enough of it to get the references, though. And there was an episode in one of the incarnations of it where the ship, whichever iteration it was, went through some sort of force field or was in some strange part of space where everyone on the ship, on the spaceship, was falling asleep. And if they fell properly asleep, they would die. And so they had to keep each other awake or they would die. And without other people to keep me awake, I went back to sleep. Perchance to dream, no, perchance to die, because my drinking and using is very dangerous. So the problem is not waking up. I think God will wake a person up on a regular basis, or if not, wake them up, make their sleep very uncomfortable and knock very loudly on the door and shout through the letterbox. One can ignore it, but there are warning shots. I got a warning shot about 9 months later when I got a letter from my closest friend, which was on behalf of the whole friendship group to say your behaviour last night was so unacceptable. None of us want anything to do with you. We wish you well. Off you go. This is called a wake-up call, and I made some efforts to sort myself out, and I made some apologies and so on. But without recovery, I started to fall back asleep. In January 1993, I went to a meeting, and uh, it was like water on cracked mud, and I immediately started to absorb all sorts of things that were being said. It was very clear that the collective understanding of things in the fellowship beyond the room that I was in had explanatory value, that they would be able to explain why I was so unhappy. They would be able to explain why, when I drank and used, I was so hell bent. They would be able to give me a solution. This was all very clear, and I absorbed it very quickly. I got the sense of it very quickly. But there is a force within me which is very powerful, not stronger in me, I think, than in anyone else. I think it's in everyone, which doesn't like being told what to do, which doesn't want to dissolve into the group, which likes its little identity. I'm like this and they're like that. Um, which looks to separate me from other people, which makes lists of all of the things that other people are doing wrong and then memorizes them just in case one should forget them. Grievances, resentments, uh, wondering what people think about me, wondering what I think about myself, asking ridiculous questions like, I don't know who I am and who am I? Well, what am I supposed to be doing here? That last question is maybe a useful one, but the who am I one is not a very useful question. Essentially, obsessed with me, obsessed with my life, obsessed with my place in the world, and obsessed with grabbing and grasping whatever I can before I shuffle off this mortal coil as this creature inside me, this lower force, this ego, this devil, this whatever you want to call me, tells me is going to happen. It doesn't want to know about God. It doesn't want to know about anything metaphysical, anything beyond the realm we've got. All it knows is sex, drugs, drink, not rock and roll in my case, that will be the next on the list. Power, money, prestige, comfort, thrills, the achievement of ambitions, the attainment of a particular position in the world, the accumulation of wealth, either to show off or to feel superior or to prove I'm someone or to build buttresses or fortresses against the world so they, whoever they are, can't get me. That voice came back. It had been silenced at my first meeting by some kind of spiritual sucker punch, but it started to make its way back. And you know what? It had, that voice, the ego, the devil, the lower force, the evil inclination, had already started to make itself felt by the end of my first meeting. So really enjoyed the first meeting. Great. Afterwards, a little crowd of people who were taking pity on me. I was 21 and I was pitiful. 21 going on 45. Someone years later said I looked like a ghost. They thought I was literally going to die, possibly in front of them. And they said, "Do you want to come for coffee?" And the little voice inside me, which always sounds like it's speaking in my voice, said, now, what I said to them was, I think maybe next week. What I thought, the little voice said, me? Go for coffee with you? You think I've sunk so low? Think again, sunshine. That was by the end of the first meeting. It's quick, isn't it? It didn't take long for it to get its little script ready and start talking back. And the trouble is with that voice keeps me in a daze. A sleepness is being asleep to reality and being stuck in a fantasy world. And that voice is what keeps me stuck in the fantasy world. And if you're not an alcoholic or an addict, you can muddle through the world pretty well with that voice. And it will get you stuff. The world is built to give that character what it wants. It's structured to do that. It's designed to do that because everyone's got the same script, essentially. So you can stay stuck in that for a long time. As an alcoholic and addict, I can't afford to have that voice be my director. It said in Bill's story, alcohol was my master. People are struggling sometimes with the notion of handing their wills and lives over to the power greater than themselves. What do you think you've been doing for the last few years other than handing your will and life over to a power which, as a chap in East London says, my head wouldn't let my feet rest. I remember on roving around, drunk and doing other activities, thinking, I just wish this would stop so I could go to bed and sleep for about 3 days, but my head wouldn't let my feet rest. Something inside me that was more powerful than me was in charge. It was keeping me in a state of sleepness, which felt like awakeness. Have you noticed when you're having a really bad dream at night, it feels like you're awake, but you're not? That is the form of asleepness. The asleepness isn't like the asleepness of a little dog that's had a lovely run in the park and has tired itself out. It's the sleepness of it's the sleep of an endless nightmare. That is the thing that I'm to wake up from. What persuaded me in the end to toe the line in recovery was alcohol. It talks about alcohol being a great persuader, and other things have been great persuaders too. Uh, Sometimes people say that we shouldn't talk about God too much because it'll scare newcomers off. If you're drinking and using is not so frightening that you can take someone else mentioning God occasionally. My drinking and using had to get frightening before I was ready to come to a meeting. My drinking and using is terrifying. What's terrifying about it is having to watch, having to be there for it while it drags me round, pushes me in front of moving vehicles, gets me arrested, and then has me saying, "More, please." What did I have to do to wake up? I get the sense from this meeting, group, gathering, whatever you call it, that there are a few people who are pretty switched on. And you know the drill, the steps. Meetings, sponsorship, service. The book Alcoholics Anonymous refers to itself as the basic text, and describes how the program is comprised in its first few chapters up to 164. And sometimes the program is presented as just the steps on page 59 of the big book, so a couple of hundred words summarized under 12 headings. The book itself says well, it is the steps, but it's not really the steps. It's a summary of the steps. What are the steps? It's the whole thing. I was in recovery for a number of years before I tried. I remember the desperate experiment of the first drink. I tried the desperate experiment of, right, let's take this book, let's do everything it says precisely as it says and see whether its promises are true or not. I cook a lot, and I know if I change the recipe, I made a cake today. The cake which comes out of the oven may be perfectly tasty, but will not be the cake promised in the book. It will be different. If I change it radically, it will be radically different. If I do precisely what it says in the book, no more, no less, I'll come to the no more in a minute, perhaps. If I do that, I will get the results. The only way to test whether the book delivers the results it promises is to do precisely what it says. Now, that's probably obvious to you. It wasn't obvious to me, because one is influenced by the culture of the meetings one goes to, the people one surrounds oneself with, and I was not surrounded by people in recovery who A, used the big book, B, used it systematically, C, used it comprehensively. It was mentioned, but there was a lot of other stuff that was talked about as well. It was certainly not the done thing, 20 years ago, to simply take the big book and do everything that was in it. I acquired the notion of doing that from some tapes I heard from some Americans, dare I say, who seemed to have their heads screwed on. Looking back, I was guided to that by God. I can't see any other explanation for it. And it shows you prayers are answered. One might not even have known one was praying. One might simply have been crying out in desperation in some way, wordlessly, to God, but God heard. Willingness will always find a way. If a way isn't found, arguably the problem lies with the willingness. But anyway, that's another question. What's the point? The point is that I started to use the basic text as a basic text, which meant I had to know what was in it. I don't really know what was in it. Not read it like a novel, skim through, but really know what was in it. I was talking to someone the other day, and the poor person was in a terrible state and had relapsed or had really resumed drinking. I think to say one's relapse means that one must have recovered. If one hasn't recovered, one is simply continuing to drink after a short break. Anyway, this person had had a little drinky, and I said, "What step were you on when you drank again?" And she said, "Step 4." I said, "Oh, very good. So you've done step 1. Very good." I said, "Out of curiosity, what do you think the main lesson was in the big book from the story The Man of 30?" And the poor soul didn't know. Fair enough. But this is being on step 4 and not knowing what step 1 says. It's no good going through it once and thinking, well, I've done that now, and retaining none of it. One's got to retain it. And no one can force it into my brain. I've got to read it and reread it and reread it and apply it and apply it and apply it, and eventually it goes in and starts to become the DNA uh, of how I live, the DNA of the new person that I become, the DNA of the awake person. Now, doing everything that the book suggested, apart from the fact it delivered the promises that the big book, well, promises, in a startling and very quick way. I mean, I was amazed at how quick it was, partly because the steps that I took, particularly the step 8 and 9, was very quick. I processed, I had, by the time I was a few years clean and sober, I had a number of years of recovery behind me, and I was no slouch generally, and I had some common sense and I had some sensible people around me. So when I went through the amends, I processed a list of 70 or 80 people in about 9 days and made all of the amends that came out of there that were due, and cleared the list until I got to a point where I could say, really eye to eye with God, there's no one left. I'm off the hook. Finito. And I got really remarkable results. But here's the interesting thing. The feeling I got when I completed the last of the amends, and I went for a long run and did a meditation on the run. Meditation, by the way, isn't mindlessness. In AA terms, it's taking a thought and concentrating on it, taking an idea and saying, how does this apply? Reading some materials and letting those materials soak into me. It's not about me putting myself in a bubble and staring at myself and looking at my thoughts and trying to detach from them. It's 180 degrees the opposite of everything I thought meditation was. Concentrated, directed, deliberate thought of higher principles and matters, and how those can be brought to bear in every area of my life, my beliefs, my thinking, and my behavior. It's the most intense thought of the day. It's not the least intense. It's not a way of switching off. It's a way of switching on. It's not a way to achieve an emotional state. It's a way to create a contact, or to further improve my already created contact with a power greater than myself, with God, so that the channel is open. God can literally tell me what to do today. That is meditation. Anyway, I did a meditation and it was amazing. But the wake up call from that, I think the completion of the 9th step is the beginning of the waking up, not the end of the waking up. I'm awake now. It's the beginning of the waking up process, and I think that waking up process probably goes on forever. As I look back at myself when I was 30 years and 2 months sober, thinking, how could I have been such an idiot? How could I have been so asleep? So there are clearly degrees of asleepness here. I'm still, therefore, at some level, asleep. Of course I am. Um, if I dare mention A Course in Miracles, not conference-approved literature, but you can mention anything as long as you apologise profusely enough for it. In A Course in Miracles, Ken Wapnick says, if you're on the planet and breathing, you believe all this stuff is real. If you didn't, you wouldn't be here. Very good point. So there's an asleepness which is still, which I'm still being woken up from. But the point, when I completed step 9, I started to wake up. It was the sound of the alarm clock burning through the foggy edges of my dream. And I started to wake up then. Bill Cleveland, very good AA speaker, says that uh, the last 3 steps are not the maintenance steps. He says, you've got nothing. At the end of step 9, if you've done it properly, you've got 0. Nothing. You are beginning to grow only once step 9 is complete, because that is what clears all the crap out of the way. That is what enables the foundations of the new life to even start being constructed. So the waking up starts at that point. And the first thing that I really woke up to was that no one has ever made me feel anything, even when I was a kid. Lots of things happened and lots of bad things happened, but don't they to everyone? There are differences of degree, I'll grant that. And everyone always thinks their story, most people think their story is worse than other people's. But everyone's got some stuff. But even that stuff, it is not the incoming event that causes my emotion, it is my reaction to it. I was talking to a psychologist many years ago who said, yeah, like 75% of your character is actually built into the DNA. You're programmed by the DNA to react in certain ways. It's coming from you, it ain't coming from the outside. And the amazing thing is, that is, I remember even at 7, 8, 9, choosing pathways. Could I react like this or react like that? And I had examples of really good behavior around me. I had examples of really bad behavior. I had examples of people that had peace of mind and were cheerful and kind and useful and wonderful, and then examples of whack job neurotics. And I recall looking at the whack job neurotics and thinking, you're the ones, you've got a notion of how things are really going on here. I remember the choices that were being made. But even beside that, um, all through my life, there has always really been a choice about how to respond to things. I'm creating my own emotion from the thoughts that I have about the things that are happening. And what my inventory over the years has become, uh, on the internal side, is looking at what false beliefs are creating those negative emotions. Um, the the phrase which sums this up, which I got from my friend Astrid, is the call to coming from within the house. And this is why I'm very careful about how I talk about things. I won't say this event happened, it made me feel dot dot dot. I'll say, no, I'm choosing to respond to this situation in a particular way. Why am I doing that? My sponsor says, if something repeats, it's because you like it. And why would I keep choosing anxiety? Why would I keep choosing grievance and resentment? You know why? When I'm full of grievance, when I'm full of resentment, when I'm full of fear, which I tell people I don't like this at all, guess who is occupying my consciousness? I am. I am filling my entire universe. It's very flattering. I'm on the stage. No one else is on the stage. In the theatre, it's completely dark. The limelights are lighting up me and no one and nothing else. Even the cosmic, even the nature of the universe, the fact the sun is going to burn out, the potential for nuclear war, whatever it is that I think is bothering me, the climate catastrophe. Don't people love to just whatever? When I'm upset by those, I'm not concerned about the thing. I'm concerned about its impact on me, either materially or philosophically. I've taken the place of this great, huge, gargantuan world event. I've pushed it off the stage, and it is the excuse for me to be on the stage. And as I heard someone say, why is all of this stuff so attractive? Because you can remain the hero of the dream. That's all I ever wanted. The idea of being a jigsaw puzzle piece, which, when placed in the jigsaw, ceases to be discernible to anyone else. If you noticed when you've done a jigsaw puzzle, you don't really look like the jigsaw puzzle doing types, but you're going to have to bear with me on this one. Maybe as a kid or with your aunt you did a jigsaw puzzle 30 years ago. You can see all the individual pieces when they're in the box and you're sorting them out. You put them into the jigsaw puzzle. Once it's complete, you stand back. You can't see any of them in the right light. You can't see any of the individual pieces because you're now looking at the picture. The ego does not want that because once I'm placed inside the jigsaw puzzle, I don't need it anymore. And it will cease to exist. So it will do anything to try to tell me that I have this real separate existence. What else do I need to wake up to? I needed to wake up to the fact that I occupy only an extremely small part of the universe. And so I should not command very much of my attention at all. What should command my attention? Service. Asking God each day, what tasks do you want me to perform? And then having my focus being on those tasks. Prayer, meditation, study, spiritual study, and appreciation. Um, a great speaker, Don Pritz, would say that we're on God's amusement park planet. If you're not enjoying yourself, you're really missing something. And I enjoy myself. I enjoy my life. Maybe the things that I enjoy would not be the things that you enjoy, but the point is the enjoyment, not the things. And the notion of the Sabbath, the seventh day, when you can rest and sit back a little bit. So it's not. We're in recovery. There's a danger of getting into a sort of Jack Nicholson in The Shining situation where you spend so much time doing service and sponsoring that you never have time to crack a smile. All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, and then we all know what happens at the end of The Shining. We don't want that to happen in recovery. So one's got to stop at some point, let other people have a go, and enjoy oneself. What else have I had to wake up to? Um, that I am in charge of the contents of my mind. People use the phrase, I'm full of fear, as though they're a little pot and someone has opened the lid and poured all the fear inside, and the pot has said to it, oh, look at me, I'm full of fear. That's not the image. The image is of someone fear knocking at the door, and you're saying, well, come right in, or trying to argue with it through the door, trying to tell it to go away and explain to it why it's very silly and why God is very big. If I'm engaging in the thoughts at all, they've already won. They have already distracted me from doing God's will, which is what I'm here to do. So my job, I get to be introspective for 5 minutes a day. That's it. 5 minutes a day. The rest of the time, if I can't find out enough of what I'm doing wrong in 5 minutes, give it another day, it'll come clear. I've got to persistently turn my attention back to the task at hand and not even engage, not just not let in those thoughts and not play with them, but not even to engage with them. Just go, and that's the end of it. Padre Pio was tormented for a while by visions of the devil. He would see the devil in the corner of his room until he started to adopt an approach where he would say, when he woke up and saw the devil there, oh, it's only you, Bluebeard. I thought it was someone important. That is the approach to adopt to all of my neurosis, all of that darkness, which you could spend years talking about and paying other people to talk about as well. No, I've had enough. There's nothing there. There really is nothing there. And what I've discovered is when I live life simply being present to other people, to the world, to God, to the tasks at hand, I'm given the grace to stay away from alcohol and drugs and all of the other behaviors one day at a time. That's exactly 40 minutes. Thanks for listening. Thank you. So the question is being quick to see where religious people are right. Um, I have to say, I'm very disloyal in that I'll read anything which helps. I do, and I'm not going to say what it is. I do have a religious tradition that I follow, which is what I believe. But frankly, I'll take I'll take what I can get. Now, uh, the basic principles of what to read, who to listen to, what to watch. I think there are some principles which are very important. The first one is if I can't reconcile the principles to the basic principles of the 12-step program, I'm not interested. If it seems to want to pull me away from that towards something else, if a tradition wants me to microdose something or macrodose something or cut Pan's drinking chocolate, that's one of the more recent ones, because the chemicals create a special effect. Not interested because it's at odds with our program. Uh, Fortunately, very few spiritual things I've come across do create a problem with the program. It seems amazingly flexible. Um, I've got on best with traditions where God is has some kind of personhood. And I'll tell you why. I tried all sorts of other things, and really, what I was doing was trying to avoid the question of who would be in charge. I loved the idea of certain traditions when I was in my first few years, where there wasn't actually a god, but there were just sort of general spirits or forces in the universe, because they didn't represent a challenge, an authority challenge. The notion of God with a capital G, there's an authority problem there. Who's going to be in charge? It's not going to be me. And what I came to in the end, now I know that lots of other people make the program work extremely well as atheists, as agnostics, as Buddhists, as Zen practitioners, as Taoists, as Shinto practitioners, whatever. Fine. But but you know, for me, as they say, in step 11, it says we prayed for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. God's will, to have a will, something must be sentient and intelligent and have a mind. Has basically got some kind of personhood. To pray and meditate, I find it much easier to have a God I can talk to and have the sense that I'm not talking to a kind of an interface. I'm actually talking to someone who can listen. Maybe that's my limitation, but that's what I found. A couple of other practical things. Um, there was a Course in Miracles teacher. There is a Course in Miracles teacher called Earl Purdy. I'm not trying to plug Course in Miracles in particular. It just happens to have come up in the question, in the answer to the question. He says, if you're unhappy, take the Course in Miracles, although it will be true with the Bible, it will be true with basically any spiritual text. Read it until you're happy. If you read it for a few hours and you're not happy yet, you haven't read it for long enough. And it reminded me of the line in the 12 and 12 where Bill is very, very naughty and very clever. He says, almost the only scoffers at prayer are those who haven't tried it enough. So if you're scoffing at it and you've been scoffing at it for 5 years, give it another year. Try that. I had February, which is the longest month, was a month of blessing. Now that sounds nice, doesn't it? What is a blessing? There are three types of blessing. The first type is when an amazing thing happens out of the blue. The second type is when something apparently bad happens, but it turns out to be a blessing. It turns out to save you from something. The third type of blessing is something which is incredibly painful, but forces you to grow to a higher level. I had the third type of blessing in February, and when the material hit the fan. And it was all inside me. I mean, there were minor, trivial, external things going on, but when the material hit the fan in me, I made sure that my program was nailed down with right action in service, in sponsorship, step 11, step 10, step 12, talking to a sponsor, talking to peers in recovery. Fine. But literally every spare minute I had, I was listening to spiritual materials, watching stuff, reading stuff, figuring out what is the lesson that I'm supposed to learn. There are about 30, 40 lessons that I need to learn. Hours a day. I need to do that periodically. But all of that stuff is in addition to rather than instead of. And I think there's another question from Danny. So, question about what the spiritual routine looks like. My answer is going to be really annoying because, frankly, it changes almost every day. No 2 days are exactly the same. It has to be flexible to my circumstances, to my obligations, to where I am, to what is going on that day, to the state that I'm in. Sometimes I'm in a state. Um, uh, Never worry that one is in a state. Sometimes the evil inclination, the addiction, the alcoholism, the ego, the devil, whatever you want to call it, sometimes it is most vigorously on the offensive precisely because you're doing well. The devil doesn't bother people who are in his camp already, just leaves them be because they're already in the bag. Anyway, the daily routine. Um, Page 86, we ask God to direct our thinking. I've also taken to thinking about God, talking to God, praying prayers as I'm going to sleep and as I'm waking up in the morning. Because I go to bed early enough, I wake up naturally. I won't submit to the violence of an alarm clock. And the natural waking up means there's a good hour to half an hour of actually being half awake. And after a few years of practice, you end up just praying during that time because you trained yourself to. So by the time I wake up, I'm fighting fit. The first thing I then do is I listen to, at the moment, particular spiritual talk classes they are actually. And I do that until I get to work. And then back to page 86, we consider our plans for the day. Now, I've got some various readings that I do and prayers that I pray and prayers that I mine, repositories of prayer that I mine. I look for one line that I think, okay, that hits the mark for where I need to be today. Inventory from the previous 24 hours, plus corrective measures for the next 24 hours. So what should my attitude be in the areas which are problematic? Write it down. But most specifically, and this is the meat and potatoes of it, literally, what does God want me to do today? What tasks? It says God is my employer. And so the purpose of the meditation is uh, the central part of it is to acquire a knowledge, a plan for the day, so that I can then get on with the plan, not worry about anything. Everything is now in God. And once you've got the plan, I'll tell you what's in God's hands. The past, gone. The future, gone. The world, gone. Other people, particularly gone. Me, not interested. My life, not interested. The results of anything, not interested. That frees up the whole day for me to actually do the things and have my mind present for the things. I don't particularly need to be still to meditate. I need to be awake and present and meditation is an activity, and it's just like anything else. As long as I've had my breakfast and I have my cup of coffee and I'm ready to roll, it's something I activate. I don't need to be in a special mood or a special position or have my breathing or heart rate at a special pitch. That's about the body. Meditation is about the direction of my mind towards God. And if I can't, I've known people who are religious, who maintain their religion in war zones where they have to say their daily prayers several times a day, and they're in a particular country and with the system they have, they're allowed to stop and do that at certain times in the middle of a war zone with shells going off, and they stop and they pray. So I'm not required to achieve a particular state before doing the meditation. I'm simply required to bring my concentration to it as I would to a work task, because that's really what it is. Now, if I happen to feel better out of it, good for me. But that's not the purpose of it. It's not there to achieve a particular feeling state. It's there to fit me to be of maximum service for the rest of that day. James. Yeah, so the question about, if you've got uh, relatives or um, other people you've been close to who have had trouble with drink or drugs. Um, the great thing about the 12 steps is that they can be used by any bunch of people who want to, with permission from uh, AA, and AA gives it very freely. It's given it several hundred times. And one of the great things about Al-Anon, the Al-Anon family groups, is they use the 12 steps of it. They say, we use the 12 steps of AA. And so you can, although AA literature is not official Al-Anon literature for lots of historical reasons, it gives you a place to go and talk about these questions, but more specifically to find sponsors to take one through the steps. And if anyone knows someone who's interested in the 12 steps, but that person doesn't have an alcoholic in their life or didn't grow up with an alcoholic, Al-Anon will still consider you, as it were. There are even there's one story in the main Al-Anon book where it says that this person went to Al-Anon meetings for some particular reason, and they don't know who the alcoholic in their family is or was, or if there even was one going back generations, but they so identified with the problem, they picked up the Al-Anon solution and it worked. And Al-Anon won't ask any questions and try to qualify you. So Al-Anon is the go-to. If you haven't got any active addictions, Al-Anon is the go-to place if you want access to the 12 steps. And if one can find a big book person within Al-Anon, which is possible, it's a little bit hard, but one can do it, then that can be very, very helpful, because it's hard to understand the steps in any other context without having gone through the big book, because well, that's where it came from. So to understand them fully, you've got to read the basic text. So that's the answer to that.